Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, CEO of SaaStock. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Shelley Perry, Managing Director at Scalelogix Ventures. Welcome, Shelley.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Alex.
Great to have you on. I know we're obviously virtual. We're on a Zoom call. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from my home studio in San Francisco. I developed a home studio during quarantine, so here I am.
Very smart. We were just chatting just before we pressed record that you've got dual redundancy or dual internet lines, which I failed to do so far, but a necessity today, I think, a necessity. So good on you. So Shelley, I know, well, we've only sort of, become acquainted, sort of recently because you're speaking at the Blueprint Series for CEOs on December the 15th. So I've obviously done my research on you, but and I'm hoping some of our audience knows you, and we have some common acquaintances as well. But why don't you tell the audience, if they've not heard of Shelley Perry before, who are you as a person? What do you do? What is Scalelogix Ventures?
So Scalelogix Ventures is a incubation investment firm that focuses on things that help a CEO during the scale-up stage of growth. Over the last 4 years, I had the opportunity to work with Insight Partners, fantastic firm. And one of the things that I learned is that there's so much help that a CEO, especially scaling from 1 to 10 million, needs. And as investment firms get larger, it's harder for them to focus on the 1 to 10 million, especially if it's not a majority check. And just the littlest of things, the littlest of help the right size value help will help a company scale from 1 to 10. And the problem is that there's not a lot of vendors or programs out there, or even advisors that specialize in that stage of growth, because it's a unique stage of growth, and the fact that you've got to understand the choices that people have made during startup to help them really during scale up, that first stage of scale up. So one of the things that I do is help companies that want to specialize in the scale up stage of growth to provide right size resources to CEOs during that phase. And we train them on the scale up stage of growth. We help them develop programs and value-based solutions that work for that 1 to 10 million kind of growth range. And we help them create new businesses, and at the same time create new value to the CEOs and the C-suites of the companies during that stage.
And you've been an operator, not just an investor as well.
Yes.
I think when I'm looking on LinkedIn, I've seen you as CEO of some European SaaS companies and COO and so on. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I've spent 25 years in software. I started as a financial person and realized very quickly that I was an accountant actually, and had much more fun automating the financials than I did doing the accounting part. However, one of the key things that I've always liked to have in my background is I am financially oriented. So I went into technology because I wanted to learn how to automate more of the things that I didn't want to do routinely on a monthly basis. And so I went back to school and got my master's in computer science, and I've just been hooked on software, specifically the SaaS model, for the last 25 years. And I have worked as a developer at VP of engineering up through CTO, CPO, an operating partner, and a CEO most recently, until I decided to create an incubation firm for helping CEOs that are in this stage of growth. And one of the things that I really like about Europe and experiencing working in Europe right now is SaaS is starting to explode in Europe. And it's so much fun. I remember when SaaS started to explode in the US, and there's just such an opportunity for careers and for companies. And I see Europe going through that same evolution right now, and I'm just excited to be a part of it.
Awesome. And so, I mean, as you when I first started SaaStock and the first conference in 2016, which we had, again, this was, I think, like Europe started to explode from a SaaS sense at that time. And we had, Nikos Moratakis, CEO of Workable, I think we had Des Traynor from Intercom, for instance, when they were like, kind of much smaller companies. And even I know that you advise, as you mentioned, like ChargeBee, not European, although they're in Europe now. But again, like Chris, I think, from ChargeBee, when he attended SaaStock in 2016, they were Series A or something like that, right? And now they're F.
Yeah,
so
they are F. I've been working with ChargeBee since late 2017, and it's just been so much fun to work with the team and see them explode. But they do have an office now in Amsterdam, and I like to think I had a help in that because I was a CEO for a company in Amsterdam as they were deciding which headquarters. And I said, I think Amsterdam is great. So I like to think I have a little bit of a impact on that.
It all makes sense now. It makes sense now. Good stuff. And it's great. I mean, look, it's like, going back to that 2016 story, all the speakers that we had, what I wanted speakers to have this quality of, which I'd sort of defined as SaaS chops, right? You've got to have your SaaS chops there. And I think from what you've explained, 25 years and your various roles, as an operator, and then through, an investor, and now obviously, at Scalelogix, you've definitely got those. So that's why, we have you speaking at Blueprint, which is on the 15th of December. And effectively, for those maybe that don't know what Blueprint is, over the last sort of 5 years at SaaStock, we've seen by, being exposed to, some amazing talks that, through all of our conferences and founders, people like Goddard Abel and David Cancel, for instance, just to kind of call out that there is a blueprint, to get to 1 to 10 million, right? But often people are kind of finding it either, themselves and struggling to get there. And a lot of companies really kind of fail in that stage, right? Because they're making a lot of mistakes. And we want to kind of, show CEOs, particularly, during this event, that they shouldn't necessarily have to worry perhaps as much as they do, because there is a proven path to do it. And we want to discuss, and that's why we've created this whole, specific content and event around that. So very excited for that. You can learn more about Blueprint at saastock.com/blueprints. But what we're going to talk about today very neatly ties into that, Shelley. It's the top mistakes first-time founders make when scaling and how to avoid them. And I think you've probably seen them all. And I know that, like, on the notes that you've shared, like, that we could probably make a podcast series on this, but we're not.
That's definitely one to think about, isn't that?
Yeah.
Alex? We'll put that on the to-do. We'll put that on the to-do.
Yeah, definitely. But we got 30 minutes or less now, right, to talk about it. So we're gonna pick some of the mistakes, and I mean, like, why not? Let's go with what I don't know if there's like a number one mistake.
I think I classify the number one mistake as this, and it's I take this word from the European. In America, math is singular, and in Europe it's maths, which I've learned. And so I think one of the biggest mistakes is not understanding or not taking the time to do something I call the product market fit pause. Entrepreneurs that start companies are so fantastic at listening to customers. They have a notion of a problem space. They listen to customers. They can in their head kind of calculate what platform or what they have developed to date or what they're doing, and they can kind of twist it very quickly and go back to their team and build it, right? Or get it built, because that's just, they're fantastic at it. They're fantastic at multitasking and quick thinking and doing that and trying to find product market fit. When you don't take a pause and kind of switch how you're working, and not 100%, but a portion of it, you don't take that product market fit pause to kind of step back and determine what of all of those experiments that you did, which are paying customers, you don't step back and look at what is truly at that moment the product market fit, because it's product market fits. There's multiple product market fits. When you don't do that and you don't put your part of your organization into this mode of repeatedly selling the exact same thing to the same cohort while the rest of the organization is still doing the finding, the next product market fit, that's when they start to fail, because that skill that is so needed for entrepreneurs to kind of test and listen and test and sell slight derivations of something is contra to scaling. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to continually just overnight flip the switch and everyone work on one thing, but it is important that you stop, and I call it the product market fit pause, really pause and look at what exactly in the core of what you've been selling is your product market fit. And that's typically what you have retention in, right? So it takes a little bit of time to understand that, how long it takes to implement or get someone on board, or if you have strong retention. So most of the time they don't do that because they just keep selling what they thought they could sell or slight derivations. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. And it's hard for entrepreneurs to do that because what made them successful to even get to 1 million isn't going to be the same thing in that particular area that gets you to 10 million.
How long do you pause for?
You never pause 100%, right? Like back in the day, I worked for EDS, had this commercial, which is like the plane and flight. EDS isn't a company anymore, but electronic data systems. But they had this ad that was like building the plane and flight. So you don't take a pause in terms of everything stops, but you take enough of a pause to do the data analytics against what truly is your product market fit, and you do it while you're still selling, and then you make adjustments in terms of what you're going to arm your large sales force with and the new people coming on with a very small kind of product set and enablement set, and then you continue to expand that over time. So it's as long as it takes for the data. When you have enterprise solutions first, it takes a little bit less. You have less customers. When you have product-led growth and low ASP at high volume, it takes a little bit longer. So it really just depends, but it's not a full 100% pause. You don't stop the company, but you definitely stop and take that analysis and then continue that practice forever forward.
This one may not be as big as the what we just mentioned about taking the pause, but I thought quite topical, certainly to me. But not hiring an assistant, and then you put Calendly isn't a replacement. Now,
Yes.
the reason I'm smiling is that and maybe I shouldn't smile, but I've replaced my assistant with Calendly for the moment.
So you did like that. So look, yeah. I think you should have Calendly and an assistant, because look, what's great, you send me a Calendly, here, Shelly, here's my Calendly, and I send you a Calendly, who's going to connect us, right? Someone actually has to go and do that. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is, look, as a CEO of these companies, you are the glue, and you are the only one that's strategically kind of holding everything together, and also looking at where all the gaps are. Especially when you're growing, you don't have the full leadership team, or your leaders don't have the skill and the passion and kind of what made you you. And so when you think about it, you need to make sure that every moment of your time is used on things that only you can do. So even drafting emails, kind of following up on things, getting ready for your team meetings, sending out kind of all hands updates, a newsletter to your team because everyone's distributed now, and the communications, any moment that they can give you back so that you can focus on the strategic direction or listening to customers or filling in the gap is going to grow your business. And when you think about the cost of a VA and those tasks that someone's going to help you with, they're probably the last things that you do. They're incredibly important, but they're not things that you need to spend time on. So maybe it's not Calendly, but it certainly is emails and email follow-ups. And for me, I know I always say, I want to make sure that everyone, I want to spend more time with my team. So I make sure that someone's looking at my calendar and telling me you're not spending enough time with your team, or you're not working out, right? I tell them it's really important to me to work out, and someone to remind you. So I think people think of it as a luxury or a waste, but in the end, what it's doing is enabling you to do more of only what you can do. And so every CEO I work with that gets their first kind of institutional money, the first thing I do is go, you really need to get an assistant. And they go, no, I don't know. And I go, I'll help you. And then I have the spec and I help them. And then I have someone help them onboard. And then within 2 or 3 months, they're like, oh my gosh, how did I ever live without that person? So it just matters. And it's not about a calendar. It's about your time being the most valuable for your company.
And I have to clarify, it wasn't that I didn't like her, but actually when we had to make some cuts this year because event industry suffering a little bit because of the pandemic, and a couple of our investors said that having a virtual assistant was a luxury, and unfortunately that was the reason. But yeah, maybe so in a would you suggest then in a growth time or a period of growth when you are going from 1 to 10, then it is essential, but like perhaps that before 1 million or something like that, maybe it's not necessary.
Look, first of all, and I'm not going to say this, like the investors, and I'm an investor as well.
Yeah.
The investors don't run your company, you do, right? And so you have to look and see. Sometimes a virtual assistant, and I found this great company called Virtual Hub, and I'm not associated with them at all, but it's great because it's cost effective, it's well run, and it's just they have cost effective VAs that they've trained, they select and train, and I think it's a great service. But I think that, look, if you have a virtual assistant and you then can have 10 more hours a week to work on sales and marketing, it may be the difference between you having to hire a head of sales and marketing and you're going to do a better job at it anyway. So I think it's just looking at where you're spending your time, and that investor doesn't know where you're spending your time. You do, right? And that investor doesn't know what your unit costs are or where the pain points, the deep pain points are in your company. So I think you have to step back and make sure that you're looking at that. So I can't tell you if you should, but what I do know is the CEOs of a scale-up company it's really hard to get to 1 million, right? Many startups fail. And if you get to that stage, there's something that you can be doing that you can get lift on. And a VA is a perfect place to start. It may be the difference between you having to hire a marketing person and you create the copy and your VA like helps you distribute it on social media, because that's a common skill set these days. That's not a specialized skill set. Every person who, is from 3 years old on knows how to post things on social media. So I think it's about thinking about how you're spending your time and then how to use those dollars the most appropriately. And an investor's just not running your business, you are.
Good point. And noted as well.
I'm passionate about this. Can you tell?
I felt like you were speaking to me. I mean, you are speaking.
I am speaking to you, Alex. I'm speaking to you.
So we'll move on to a next sort of common mistake, and hiring. It's like a huge mistake. That first-time founders, I mean, maybe second time, third time, but they probably got it a little bit better, right? That's the hope. But hiring in that phase, the 1 to 10 million, and then we also we'll bolt on the kind of the C-suite coaching as well, and the moving from like that manager to a coach. So let's dive into that a little bit.
I think that you talked earlier about the fact that there's a blueprint, and I think that there's not a blueprint. I think there's blueprints that you have to apply as you scale that you can use during different phases of growth. And not every blueprint applies to you, but it's certainly, you can replicate it and you can take pieces of blueprints. The way that I kind of think about it is, I'm not a huge sports person because I like to work a lot, but I kind of think of it as, you have a playbook and you go and watch other teams and you kind of see the defensive moves and the offensive moves, and you take certain collections and you teach your team how to kind of play against the offense and the defense, and you have your own kind of secret plays and people study them. And I think that's what the blueprints are, is that you can find other companies that are like yours. The issue is that in essence, you have to look at where you are and the choices that you've made during startup or even, those early stages of scale up, because every quarter, every month, whatever it is, you're making trade-offs. Sometimes you make trade-offs to have more features versus performance because you want to get customers on board for features and it doesn't scale, and that you've put forward that you need to scale later. Or maybe you have decided to build more of the back end and then sell it later, or sell first and then build more of it. Whatever it is, none of those choices are wrong. They're just different. They're different from a CEO that might have made a choice before in a different order. So I think the important thing to do when you're looking at scaling your leadership team is to make sure that you've understood the choices that you've made as trade-offs, and then decide what's the next thing that you want to do, and do you have the right team to do it. So sometimes you have to order doing something first because you have a team that has the skill sets to do it, and then you need to go and hire the person that has that skill set and then schedule it a bit later. And so I think the really important thing is to kind of look at the skills of your company today. It's the C-suite, and the C-suite I refer to as the CEO and whoever's direct to the CEO. And the way I think about it is that C-suite needs to have 100% coverage of what's happening today and what's going to happen next, right? Because in a scale up at 1 to 10, you're doubling like every month, every quarter. If those speeds, if you're at a clipping growth rate of 80, 50, 80, which you should be when you're if you've hit product market fit, you should be at that growth rate, especially with institutional investment. You have to be looking out of the corner of your eye of what's coming next. And if you're so focused on like right now and you don't see what's coming out of the corner of your eye, that's what prevents you from scaling. So I always say, look at your C-suite as a whole, kind of as a person, and look at like where your coverage is, not just for today, but what's coming. And you should be hiring for your biggest gap. And sometimes, as a CEO, you're filling in some of those gaps, but your goal should be to get yourself out of those gaps, right? Eventually. And so you should be hiring for that. And sometimes it's, it's not, is it a product person? Is it a CFO? Sometimes it's a mix of skills that you have to find in an individual that sometimes they identify as a CFO, and sometimes they identify as a COO, and sometimes they'll identify as a growth person. It's not necessarily about titles. It's understanding what you need and then finding that. And I think one of the things, the way you can do that is talk to other CEOs, talk to people who've had experience doing it before, and then narrow in on the gaps, and then talk to a few people with the profile that fit those gaps. And they will have different titles. They will have different skills. They will have come from different places. Scale-ups are unique, and they take a unique individual to be at that C-suite to kind of be able to, get their hands dirty, but also be able to strategically see. And hiring the C-suites, again, direct could be C levels, could be VPs, could be director, could be individual contributor, but you need to be looking at covering 100% of the business today and out of the corner of your eye where it's going. And that there is a blueprint to do that, to look at it, to understand it, but your gaps are going to be different than someone else's gaps. And just because someone has given you the title that you need to fill, I guarantee you, if you kind of go underneath and look at their LinkedIn, just like you did when you were introducing me, titles at the C level or VP mean very different things. So get underneath the person. And one of the things I say is like, so if an investor says to you, go hire a COO, great. What COO do you recommend? Can you give me a name? I'm not going to hire them. Just give me a profile. Because one of the things you want to do is understand what they value about the person, because they're not really saying go hire a COO. What they're really saying is go hire this person, Shelley, who happens to have a title of COO. They don't tell you go hire Shelley because they're probably at a different one of their investment companies. So you have to understand what they're really saying, the profile of the person they're saying, not the title. And I think that's the biggest issue in C-suites, is you hire for titles as you're scaling and not necessarily the gaps in skills or the right profile of person. And the title sometimes doesn't matter.
And when you've got that C-suite, that you've hired the C-suite, we talk about the ability to transition from a manager to a kind of coach, right? And coaching is a real skill set, right? Something that people like. It takes time. It takes sometimes experience, but something that takes a lot of time to develop. And for me, again, I'm not running a SaaS company, but running a business, and it's taken me maybe 4 or 5 years to try and get into that sort of like coaching mindset, running a business. So, and maybe these first time founders, like if they're going 1 to 10, they don't have 4 or 5 years to do that, right? Potentially. So what are the mistakes that people make around coaching and with a C-suite?
I think the mistake they make is something that I kind of call the scale-up tax. And that is that, look, operators operate. And when you're scaling up and you've gotten institutional money, or even if you're bootstrapping it, you you need to grow fast. And the fact of the matter is that you as a CEO or even your C-suite, your skill set and experience or passion, whatever it is a big gap from the people that you have working for you, because the economics, it has to be that way. The economics are that way. And you want to have people who are very energetic and they have a lot of potential, and you can kind of mold them and give them opportunities. So what that means is you've got a big gap. And so what happens sometimes is you estimate what the team can do based on you doing it. And in the end, they're never going to be able to do it as fast as you. So then you also don't allocate the time to coach them. And again, along the same lines of the VA and kind of where you're spending your time, most good entrepreneurial CEOs aren't good coaches because they don't have time to be. It takes time to be a good coach. And is it the right thing to do to take your time to coach them? And I don't know if it is or not. You have to answer that question. So you should constantly be looking at, is it the right thing for me to do to spend time with this person to coach them? Or do I have someone in my network who can coach them? Or do they have a big enough network who can coach them? So I think it's understanding, are you the right person to do it? Because maybe you have the ability, but you don't have time because you've got something, you're closing a deal or you're working on a financing round and you just don't have time to do it. So I think it's identifying how your C-suite can get coached and identifying what the gaps are that they need to be coached on. And even if you help identify that, or they help identify it for themselves, which is really what they need to be doing, then you need to use every way possible to get that coaching and not assume that the CEO is going to do it, because the CEO is basically filling in some of the gaps in that C-suite. So when you are selecting a C-suite or a direct to a CEO in a scale up, one of the things I always say is make sure you ask them what their network is. How do they network? How do they find out things they don't know how to do? And if they don't have a big network, it's probably not the right person to hire.
Sort of segues into my next thing. So I know we're going to talk, or certainly throughout the agenda of the Blueprint event on the 15th, about a lot of the mistakes which you can and how to avoid them. But it's not just about mistakes, for sure. But you mentioned about network here, and building a network of CEOs that recently went through your phase is another kind of common mistake. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think that people, first of all, you should always build a personal network as a CEO. It is an extremely lonely job. And one of my former colleagues, or someone who I have in my circle, is Claire Herkmans, and she's the founder of the Chief of Staff Club. And she founded that when she was actually my chief of staff. And one of the profound moments she said is, are you a founder CEO or a CEO founder? And I think the difference, if you've worked with a lot of founders who kind of scale their companies, is that as a founder, you're kind of in the thick, you're sitting next to everyone, you're in the thick of things, and you're kind of one of the team members. And as you scale, you need to become the CEO, which means you need to kind of rise above it. And in fact, you can be friends with those people, but you have a different role, and you need to kind of metamorphose to becoming the CEO. And it is a very lonely job. And especially for founders, because part of what got them excited was working in the thick of things with their team. And so the way that you can kind of get that fix is to start to build your own kind of personal CEO network. And I think if you find ones that are, one, going through the same things you are, there's a little bit of camaraderie there, and that's one group. And then what you want to do is find a group of CEOs that went through what you did a few years ago, not 10 years ago, but 2 years ago. Because if you talk to B2B CEOs from 5 years ago, many of them aren't going to understand kind of how product-led growth works in B2B. And I'm not saying they're not valuable, because they are valuable. They're just not valuable in kind of some of the things that you will be experiencing between 1 to 10 million. So find CEOs that have recently gone through the stage that you've gone through, because they're going to help you in a different way than your peer network is. And then find CFOs and find other kind of C-levels that can especially offset your skill set. You don't necessarily have to hire heavyweight C-suites. You can also build a personal network that can help you in a way that those C-suites would.
I mean, just on building network CEOs, like totally, totally buy into that. Something that, again, like me personally, I've taken too long to do, but now
I feel like this is a therapy session, Alex.
It's all hitting home. It's all hitting home. But yeah, but like obviously, again, we're not a SaaS company, but we're going through that 1 to 10 phase, and having those challenges, right, making the mistakes that other CEOs, or I'm making the mistakes that other CEOs are making, but trying to get better at that. But yeah, we part of the blueprint is delegates that sort of choose the annual program. We're putting them into a network of CEOs for a year, and so there's a lot of value in that.
That was Alex. That was actually part of the reason why I wanted to participate when you reached out, was because you are providing that service. And I know that kind of the mega funds, they're called now, the mega funds provide that and make the introductions, and even have kind of CEO roundtables because they understand the importance. And for some of the smaller VCs, they just don't have that operational ability to make those connections. They do with their own network, but I think the service that you're providing or the offering is fantastic. So it was part of the reason that I wanted to participate.
Awesome. Good to hear. Appreciate that. And I've got time for one more mistake, and I'm going to go with data-driven strategy and sort of gut to data. So yeah, let's talk about
wait, before we do that, I have to make one statement on the network. So there's an opposite problem to that networking, and that is like the analysis paralysis and getting so much input that you never move. So there is a contra to getting that network. So I think that make sure that maybe your VA or maybe, one close kind of person in your network kind of says, all right, enough, put a timeline on when you're going to make the decision. So I was just thinking about that when you were talking. So you want to create that network and you want to get input, but you have to move fast with decisions. So don't get stuck in the analysis paralysis. I just wanted to make sure that got in there. Okay. So now we're talking about data-driven strategies. Do you want to ask that question again?
Why is data-driven strategy versus like gut versus acting on gut versus sort of data a common mistake for first-time founders?
The best way that I can describe why you should have a data-driven strategy is the concept of glory days, right? You've seen kind of movies of people in high school, or they're talking about their football, I guess in America, but their football and their glory days of their heydays. And that's where I think that you need to employ a data-driven strategy pretty quickly, because this thing happens when your SaaS company starts to get popular and people see that you're taking off. You get a lot of copycats, right? Because that's it. You might be the first one to market, but people are like, oh, that's taking off, and so I'm going to copy it. And one of the things that founders do is they think that they were so close to the customers when they first started, they had to be. And then they, start to elevate and can't be as close to the customers, though certainly they're close to some, but they can't be as close because now they have an entire business to run. And they think that the customers they have in the beginning are the customers they have now. And the data helps to kind of create this universal truth. And when you're not looking at the data, if you're not looking at maybe the first customer did something and the founder's thinking that's what they did, but now they've evolved. So their company evolved just like yours evolved and the market evolved. And if you start looking at the patterns of how they're using the system now, then it is just a way to kind of align everyone. It's a universal truth. The data doesn't lie. Now, we know we can use data in different ways to kind of support our different theses, but if you don't install a data-driven operational base when you kind of hit that 1, 2, 3 million in SaaS, you can't scale because you are trying to sell so much, and you need to make sure that that data is alerting you to changes. And there's no human that can watch that data fast enough. And it's that data and the speed with which you're looking at it that's going to help you understand what's happening and alert you on exceptions of things that are changing. And I think that's the biggest mistake, is that founders kind of start to rely on gut, and just like they don't want to necessarily use a VA, they think that putting data structures in place is just operational process. But in the end, it's your biggest weapon to understand at scale what your customers are doing and how they change. And in the early stages of SaaS, look, SaaS is successful because it's an ecosystem. One of the biggest mistakes that people who come from B2B to SaaS is they kind of think about these massive kind of on-prem solutions that have these high, tied, sneaker net or heavy integrations. SaaS by design today it's cloud native, and it's so easy to do integrations. When it's easy to do integrations, it's easy to use features and functions from other people's SaaS. So the way that a company starts to use your SaaS in the beginning is going to be different as they evolve, especially in B2B. And I think that people think that that doesn't change. Well, they get it and they're growing. But if they can have a contract with you and stop using the software, and you think they're going to renew, but in fact, you would have known 3 months ago they're not going to renew, they stopped using it. And if you're not looking at data, you're only looking at sales. And again, especially in B2B, if it's a 12-year contract, or I'm sorry, 12-month contract, 12-year contract, a 12-month contract, and you're not looking at usage data, not just login, but usage patterns, you won't know that they're about to churn. So it's just really important to employ a data-driven strategy, and it's so easy now to do that. Like back in the day, I used to have to create these manual things and get all kind of capital allocations to do kind of data warehouses. You don't have to do that anymore. There's so many solutions out there that'll collect the data and then integrate it and help you understand what's going on in your business. And that is a way to save on labor costs as well. So that's why data-driven strategies are extremely important. They help you scale. They help you and keep a pace on your business that you were able to do when you were smaller because you knew everything that was going on. But very, very quickly, it gets out of your ability and control and time to do it.
And bringing in an example from my world, actually happened today. Where I had a call with a software company that we use their platform, but actually this year we haven't really used it much, right? And the renewal came up, and I've been presented with a 2-year contract, which was, I'm talking about like enterprise sort of grade pricing. Yeah. I was like, I haven't really used you guys this year, and you sent me this contract, and like, I'm not really quite ready to sign it.
Well, so what I would do, Alex, is I'd be reaching out to the CEO and telling him he needs to join the CEO Blueprint series because, because that is a common mistake, right? Like it's so easy in SaaS to know who's using your software. I mean, it's SaaS, it's there. And so it's not just a different way to do hosting. It is a different business model. And someone should have been reaching out to you, 6 months ago saying, how can we help you? I see that you're not using this.
Yeah. No, definitely. Therapy session over, Shelley.
Oh gosh, I'm having so much fun though, Alex.
Yeah. Well, actually, so obviously, as we mentioned at the beginning, and I think throughout, you're speaking at Blueprint on the 15th of December. Yes. You're on or you're leading a panel on scaling leadership with 2 great CEOs, David Darmanin, who's the CEO of Hotjar, who's bootstrapped to, I think they're 30 million ARR plus right now. They always hit a milestone during a SaaStock event, which I often sort of laugh at with David. He's a great guy building this remote first sort of business before remote was cool. The island in Malta, 30 million ARR in 6 years, no investment, fantastic. And then we've got Phil Chambers, who's CEO of Peakon, 30 million ARR as well, sort of roughly, but have taken venture capital. So I think it's gonna be a nice conversation about scaling leadership there. So excited for that, and you'll be going deep on that and not talking too much about mistakes, which we've covered.
No, but definitely the leadership choices are absolutely critical. So I think it's going to be a great session, and learn from others who have gone before you. So I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent, awesome. Well, Shelly Perry, thank you so much for being a fantastic guest. I really enjoyed talking to you today on this episode of the SaaS Revolution Show. Obviously, people will be able to see you at Blueprint for CEOs on the 15th. But if they happen to be not attending for whatever reason, maybe they're not a CEO or whatever, where can they find you? Online?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. You can also find Shelly Perry on Twitter. You can also find me hanging out on the Scale Up Edge community, which is scaleupedge.com.
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, thank you so much, Shelly Perry.
All right. Bye.